Good morning. This is lesson number 37 in our study in the book of Acts, and it's going to take us from Acts chapter 25, verse 1 through verse 22. We will cover Acts 25:23 to the end, along with all of chapter 26 in our next lesson. Let me read for us, starting with Acts chapter 25, verse 1. Now 3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. And the chief priest and the principal men of the Jews laid out their case against Paul. And they urged him, asking as a favor against Paul that he summoned him to Jerusalem, because they were planning an ambush to kill him on the way. Festus replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea and that he himself intended to go there shortly. So said he, "Let the men of authority among you go down with me, and if there is anything wrong about the man, let them bring charges against him." After he stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea, and the next day he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. When he arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many serious charges against him that they could not prove. Paul argued in his defense, "Neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense." But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, "Do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and there be tried on these charges before me?" But Paul said, "I am standing before Caesar's tribunal, where I ought to be tried. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you yourself know very well. If then I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything for which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death. But if there is nothing to the charges against me, no one can give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar." Then Festus, when he had conferred with his council, answered, "To Caesar you have appealed, to Caesar you shall go." Now let me stop right there and we'll talk about this little section of Scripture. As you know, we've talked about this last week. Felix has been replaced by Festus. Felix has been sent back to Rome, where he will stand trial for some of the things he has done wrong. Actually, not trial, he'll just be under investigation. But Festus has come along now, and he is taking over as the governor of this region. So he is the governor for most of Israel at this point in time, and he typically would be in residence in Caesarea. But to get things moving, he goes from Caesarea up to Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is the seat of government for the religious rulers of the nation of Israel. And Festus wants to go up there, and he wants to get to meet those folks that he's responsible for, and he wants to chat with them. So 3 days after he arrived in the province, he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. And the chief priest and the principal men there laid out their case against Paul. Note, they don't even take time to have small talk or to go over any of the political aspects of what's going on in the province. All Luke records for us is that when Festus gets there, the people turn around and lay out their case against Paul. It's been 2 years that they have been trying to get Paul and trying to kill him. 2 years, and they're still holding this against him. 2 years Paul has been held in Caesarea under house arrest by Felix, and now Festus has inherited this. And so the Jewish men believe that, hey, if Festus has now inherited this, he probably is going to want to get rid of this problem and make it go away. So Festus is listening to the Jewish men, and they lay out their charges against Paul. And then they ask a favor. Verse 3, notice that. They ask a favor. They aren't buttering up Festus. They don't know him well enough yet, and he hasn't been around, so they can't say, you've done great and good things for us, like they did with Felix. Instead, all they can do is ask him for a favor. And the favor is asking a favor against Paul. They want him to summon Paul up to Jerusalem because they were planning an ambush. They were planning to kill him on the way. Now, this was the same tactic they had when Paul was first taken under custody by the Romans in Jerusalem. Remember, there were 40 men that took a vow that they would neither eat nor drink until they had killed Paul. And they had set an ambush so that when Paul was being transported to Caesarea, they would attack and kill him. But that had been thwarted by God allowing Paul's nephew to bring a report to the centurions and to the tribune. And they took Paul with 470 guards to Caesarea. Now, we won't go back over that much, but it's just the fact that they had attempted to ambush Paul once. Now they're thinking Felix is gone and he doesn't know anything about, Felix is gone and Festus doesn't necessarily know anything about what they had planned 2 years before. Most likely, the tribune has also been replaced. Often when they would replace the governor, they would replace the tribune that was also working with the governor. So it's most likely that they're thinking they could trick Festus in having Paul brought to them under a small guard of people and let him be tried in Jerusalem. And on the way, they're going to ambush him. They are still harboring all of this anger at Paul. They still want to kill Paul. But Festus is a little bit too smart for them. Festus replies that Paul was being kept at Caesarea, and he says, I intend to go to Caesarea very shortly. Why don't you accompany me, you and some of your leading men, and come to Caesarea, where then we can have a trial. Now, there's a couple of expedient reasons for Festus to do this. One, the seat of government for the Romans is in Caesarea, not in Jerusalem. And so he is going to go back where he would sit upon his seat of judgment under the Roman rule and listen to the court hearing. So that's where he wants to go, and he wants them to bring their men, and he wants to listen to all that they have to say. And so he does. He goes back to Caesarea, and the Jews come, around, and notice it says in verse 7, when he had arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many serious charges against him that they could not prove. When Paul was brought up to see Festus, and the Jews were there, they crowded around him to hurl charges against him. It almost reminds me of what happened in Jerusalem when they first came upon Paul in the temple. They gathered around him and they started to attack him. They started to beat him, believing that he was blaspheming the temple. Well, now they're gathering around him, and we don't know how close they were to him, but the words that Luke uses here are used in such a way that he wants us to understand that they are picking up right where they left off before, and they are attacking Paul with their accusations. They aren't physically attacking him because they are in Caesarea, and there is a large cohort of Roman guards who are probably there in the courtroom, and so they're not going to do anything poorly. But here they are. Note also they didn't bring Tertullus, the high-priced lawyer, this time. They're just doing it themselves because they don't need Tertullus, who knew how to manipulate Felix. They aren't sure that he can manipulate Festus. So they've just come down and now they're going against Paul. And verse 8 says, Paul argued in his defense the same 3 points that he made before. He says, neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense. Now, the first two, again, as a reminder, are Jewish problems. They could be taken care of in Jerusalem in front of the Jewish council and the Jewish court. But the last one is what really is the reason they are here in Caesarea. They tried to get Felix to believe that Paul was the ringleader of a new sect, a new religion of the Nazarenes, and as such should be put to death under Roman law because he was the ringleader of an illegal religious movement. They haven't even laid that part out to Festus because obviously it has come about that that isn't true. So now Paul says, wait a second, they had a third charge against me and that was against Caesar. But I have done nothing against Caesar. And frankly, for 2 years, he's been under arrest. And what was known in this region was if you had a rebel who was arrested by the Romans, who was leading a movement, typically his followers would try to rescue him. Remember, Gamaliel argues about the fact to the council about Peter and James, how they are just leaders of this new sect. And he argued about several rebels who had come before and led away 200 and 400 individuals, but they were killed when their people tried to rescue their rebel leaders. And the movements came to no being. Well, for 2 years, nobody has tried to rescue Paul. Nobody has had an uprising or a riot trying to get Paul out of Roman custody. Nothing that normally happens in this area at this time has taken place. There have been no marches in the streets asking for the release of Paul. There have been no protests in the streets protesting an illegal incarceration of Paul. Nothing. And so they don't even bring this charge because they know that Festus will go, hey, has there been any problem? And he will be told, no, everything's been peaceful. Paul's people that come to him are peaceful. Paul's people are not causing any trouble. Neither is Paul. So Paul says, I haven't done any of this. And Paul says, Festus, says, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, well, how about this? Do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and there be tried on these charges before me? And Paul says, no, I am standing before Caesar's tribunal right here, where I ought to be tried. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you yourself know very well. If then I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything for which I deserve death, so be it. I am not trying to escape death, but if there is nothing to these charges against me, no one can give me up to them. And then the 3 words that will change everything. I appeal to Caesar. Now, why hadn't Paul done this over the last 2 years? I think he hadn't appealed to Caesar over the last 2 years because he knew that Felix would have just said, no way. We're going to take care of it here. Because remember, Felix was hoping that Paul and his followers would pay a bribe to Felix. Festus is new. And Paul knows Roman law. Paul knows as soon as a Roman who is accused of anything against Roman rule appeals to Caesar, then to Caesar he must go. Now, it doesn't mean that he will stand trial before the Caesar. What it means is he will stand trial in a court of law in Rome. It would be much like appeals that are being made to our Supreme Court. You don't go sit before the President of the United States and plead your case. You actually go before the Supreme Court, before the Supreme Justices, and plead your case there, and they determine the right or wrong of the law. The same thing in Rome at the time. If someone appealed to Caesar, they would go to Rome and they would sit before a tribunal of judges from the Roman government. And so Paul says, I appeal to Caesar. Festus then goes and confers with all of his people there, mainly because he's only been in town for a short period of time. He wants to make sure he does nothing wrong, and he's probably asking questions about Paul, about all that's gone on in the past. And he wants to know what really is happening here. After conferring with his people, he comes back and he says, to Caesar you have appealed, to Caesar you shall go. That puts an end to everything that the Jewish council is after. That puts an end to all their charges against Paul. That puts an end to Paul ever going back to Jerusalem. Paul instead is going to go to Rome to answer for the charges brought against him. Finally, Paul is headed for Rome, where he knew God intended him to go all the time. And so now we read further, just a few more verses. After this declaration that Paul shall go to Caesar and the Jewish council is sent back to Jerusalem, it says in verse 13, now when some days had passed, Agrippa the king and Bernice arrived at Caesarea and greeted Festus. And as they stayed there many days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, there is a man left prisoner by Felix. And when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priest and the elders of the Jews laid out their case against him, asking for a sentence of condemnation against him. I answered them that it was not the custom of the Romans to give up anyone before the accused met the accusers face to face and had an opportunity to make his defense concerning the charge laid against him. So when they came together here, I made no delay, but on the next day took my seat on the tribunal and ordered the man be brought up. And when the accusers stood up, they brought no charge in his case of such evils as I supposed. Rather, they had certain points of dispute with him about their own religion and about a certain Jesus who was dead, but whom Paul asserted to be alive. Being at a loss as to how to investigate these questions, I asked whether he wanted to go to Jerusalem and be tried there regarding them. But when Paul had appealed to be kept in custody for the decision of the emperor, I ordered him to be held until I could send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I would like to hear the man myself. And Festus said, tomorrow you will hear him. So now we have the next step in the issues against Paul. The Jews have left and gone back to Jerusalem, but King Agrippa has come to visit with Festus. Now, King Agrippa is the king of the Jews, and as such, he has rule over the Jewish religion and over the Jewish people according to the religious laws. He would work hand in hand with the governor that the Romans had set in place. And so he has come to meet with Festus. Now, this King Agrippa is King Agrippa II. He is actually a Herod. You remember Herod the Great. Herod the Great was the king who sought to kill all the children in Bethlehem after the birth of Christ. That was followed by King Herod Agrippa, who turned out to be the first, and he was in place throughout most of Jesus' ministry. And he is the one who would talk with Pilate, who would bounce Christ back and forth between Pilate and King Agrippa I for the trial that eventually led to the crucifixion of Christ. Now we have King Agrippa II, along with his wife, Bernice, and they have come to meet with Festus to see what's going on. Now, while the first couple of King Herods, and Herod the Great and Herod Agrippa, were not the very best of people, and they were pretty antagonistic to Jews overall and to the new religion of the Way, the followers of Christ, King Agrippa II had yet to make any major declarations against the followers of Jesus Christ. That was not something he had done. And what we're going to see here is that King Agrippa II is going to hear from Festus what is going on with this prisoner Paul. And as such, in hearing about Paul, he then wants to hear directly from Paul. Now, a couple of little things for us to note about King Agrippa II and his wife Bernice. For both of them, this is a second marriage. For both of them, they have divorced illegally, according to the Jewish law, their first spouses, and they have come together. But what makes this even worse is that it's an incestuous situation, because Bernice is actually the sister of King Agrippa II. Yeah, you heard that right. They have a relationship that is just not correct. And as such, that's going to be something that will stand out against them in the long run. But right now, we don't have that as an issue before us. We just know that they have arrived to meet with Festus. And Festus, when they start to meet with him, Festus plays out what's been going on since he arrived, that he's got this prisoner that Felix had left for him to deal with, and how he had brought the people from Jerusalem down to hear the charges against Paul, and how he was expedient in trying to hear all this, that the next day he brought the people together and he listened to what they had to say regarding Paul. So when they came together, I made no delay, he says, and I had the tribunal, and the accusers came, and they brought no charge in this case of such evils as I supposed. You see, remember I said that they did not make any statement about Paul being in charge of a sect in opposition to Roman law. And that's what Festus had expected to hear. He didn't mind hearing about the rules that Paul may have broken regarding religious things in Jerusalem, but he expected to hear a charge against Paul against Roman government, because why else would Paul be held under Roman house arrest unless he had broken a Roman law? They brought nothing. They brought no accusation against him. And Festus then says, but I offered to Paul that we go up to Jerusalem where he could stand trial there about these charges on the religious side. Now that would appeal to King Agrippa, because it would show that Festus is serious about wanting to placate the Jews and allow them to have their rule over religious things. And King Agrippa would be happy about that. But, being at a loss as to how to investigate this, I asked Paul whether he wanted to go to Jerusalem and let's have a trial there, and Paul said no. Paul appealed to be kept in custody by me until he could be heard of a decision by the emperor. So he appealed to Caesar. And to Caesar he will be sent. That's the simple side of this whole thing. Everything the Jews wanted has been trumped now because Paul, as a Roman citizen, has the right to appeal to Caesar. And he must be sent to Caesar. Now, here's a couple of things we need to keep in mind. Paul has appealed to Caesar, and he will be sent to Caesar, but he will be sent under guard. That's pretty ingenious in one sense, because Paul's going to be put on a boat in Caesarea, and he's going to be shipped off to Rome. The Jewish leaders are going to have no opportunity, no way at all, to ambush Paul and kill him. He is going under guard to Rome. He always knew he would get to Rome. God had revealed that to him. But I don't know that he always knew that he would go under Roman guard and be given free passage as such, with a guard. But that's what's happening. Paul is going to go. But verse 22 changes things just a tiny bit. Agrippa says to Festus, "I would like to hear the man myself." And Festus says, "Well, tomorrow you will hear him." That's just a little twist. It's going to delay things, not for long. But it's interesting. King Agrippa has come into power, and he wants to hear more from Paul about what Paul has been doing. Because I'm sure Agrippa has been hearing all the charges and accusations that the chief priests and the Jerusalem council have against Paul. And as such, he wants to hear from Paul himself so that he can determine what the truth really is. Now, that's a rather long time, a long section of scripture about Agrippa and Bernice and Festus talking with Paul and all that goes on there. It will take us through all of chapter 26. And so I will leave that for our next week's lesson. So next week we will do the ending here of chapter 25 and go all the way through chapter 26. What I really wanted you to get here was a little bit of the history of Festus, a little bit of the history of King Agrippa II and Bernice, and to understand that the Jews have finally been put in their place, that there is no way they are going to get Paul to stand trial for their accusations of him breaking religious rules. Because Paul, smart enough, the lawyer that he is, the expert in law, both Jewish and Roman, has appealed to the emperor, and to Caesar he will go. Well, that's it for this lesson. I hope that we can talk through this on Thursday night and see what lessons we might learn for us individually. Please be thinking about what you can learn. I think as we talked last week, we learned that patience with God is a huge thing that we need to have. Paul has had 2 years of patience. And now, one of the things we can learn is to trust God for accomplishing His will, even when we don't necessarily see how that will happen. Well, thanks for listening. God bless you. Let me close us in prayer. Father, thank you for this lesson from Acts chapter 25. Thank you for being able to see how Paul has been faithful to you and faithful to what he knows you want to have done. Guide us and encourage us as we study more and think about what's going on here with Paul and with Festus and with King Agrippa II. I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless, take care, and I'll see you again on Thursday night. Goodbye.